All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition. We're up to Chapter 14 of 25, How to Use the Grid View Control. The Grid View Control lets you display the data from a data source in rows and columns of a table. It has a lot of different advanced features built into it, like automatic pagination and sorting. It allows you to update and delete data with minimal code. And you can fully customize its appearance. So in here we want to do what? We want to describe the basic functions that are provided by the Grid View Control, describe the differences between a bound field and a template field, explain what a command field is and how it is used in a Grid View Control, explain what the before action and after action events associated with a Grid View Control are typically used for, describe how you provide for adding rows to a Grid View Control. All right, so what we will work on in here, among other things, is something that looks like this. Now, when you look at this grid view example that's right here, there's a few things to note, such as you'll notice that for costumes, for FX, and for props, we've got edit and delete buttons. And for masks, we've got an update and a cancel button. What that means is masks is what currently we had clicked edit when we were in masks, and that brought this up. Notice a couple things. These look like text boxes. If we wanted to change the short name or the long name, we would be able to do that now. But notice we don't get a text box in our primary key field. We cannot change that. Once we're in this field, if we change this, let's say from masks, let's say we make the long name Scary Masks. So if we type Scary Masks in there and we click Update, now it's been permanently changed. If we type in Scary Masks, but we still have these buttons up and we decide, I just want to leave it like Masks, you click Cancel. And if you click Cancel, it goes back, so these two buttons change again to Edit and Delete. If you click Delete, I believe it just deletes, and it does not ask, it does not say, are you sure you want to delete? Foreign keys can come into play there, though, because you can't have what are called orphan records. So the associated ASPX code that you see for this grid view is shown right here. So the grid view displays data from a data source in a row and column format that's basically shown as an HTML table. To create a grid view control, you just drag a grid view icon from the data group onto the toolbox. To bind it, you use the Smart tag. You'll notice there's a bunch of different buttons that are associated with this too. The basic properties of a grid view control are the data source ID, which again is the ID of the data source you want to bind to. Data key names. That's the name of the primary key column or columns separated by commas. Auto-generate columns, which specifies whether the controls column should be automatically generated, and I believe that's set to true by default. And selected index, which specifies the row you initially want to have selected. So when you are defining the fields that go into this, if you want to define the fields that go into this right here, you use the fields dialog box that's shown on pages 488 and 489. By default, the grid view control shows one column for each column that's in the data source. So in other words, because the categories table had three fields, a category ID, a short name, and a long name, those are what were shown. If we didn't want to show the category ID field for whatever reason, we could have come in here and with ID highlighted, we could have clicked the X. That would have removed it. If we want to be able to modify the fields, we can do that in here. So for instance, if we had the unit price was in here from products, let's say that was the products table, and we had unit price here, that's a decimal field, but if we wanted it to display as a currency field, we could go in and change that. So by default, again, the grid view control displays one column for each column in the data source. If that's not what you want, you can bring this up and add or remove. This available fields text box, the one that's over here, that lists all of the available sources for the grid view fields. The selected fields shows the ones that have already been selected or added to the grid view control. So if I wanted to add, let's say here, something else, I could do that. Now, it is possible that I could add these dynamic fields that are here, and I could have ID, short name, long name, and then I could have them in again, but then they'd show twice, which would be very confusing. If I want to show those dynamic fields, then typically what I'm going to do is remove all of these, remove all of them, and click here where it says auto-generate fields. If you do that, the fields will be automatically generated for each column, but if you do that, like I said, you'll want to remove those selected fields that you already have, and most of the time you probably won't do that, because if you decide that you want to do that, if you want to remove these and you want to click that button there, you can't format what's in there, because those fields basically aren't generated until runtime. So you can't change their appearance or their behavior at design time. So most often you probably wouldn't jack with those. The associated field properties, as they're shown on 489, the ones that you're probably going to want to work with most of the time include data field, and as mentioned on page 489, for a bound field, that's the name of a column in the underlying data source that the field should be bound to. Data format string, so again, if you put in there inside of curly braces like 0:C, that would be a decimal value, would then be shown as currency, as an example. Item style dot width is the width of the field. Read only is just for that. Null display text is what you'd want to display if that field was null. Convert empty string to null. If that's true, which is the default, empty strings are treated as nulls. You can set it to false if you don't want that to happen. Header text, which is the text that's displayed in the header row for the field. That's one you might want to change because I think it uses the field name. So for instance, if you didn't want long name as one word, you could change that header text. And show header, and if that's true, the header should be displayed for the field. The grid view control can use several different types of child elements to create and format its fields. All right, this table defines the collection of columns that are displayed by the control. So you can have columns that are displayed, that's the columns displayed by the grid view control. You can have bound fields, which is a field bound to a data source column. Button field, which displays a button. Checkbox field to display a checkbox. Command field, which you use typically for select, edit, delete, update, or cancel buttons. Hyperlink field, which displays a hyperlink. Image field to display an image. And template field that lets you create a column with custom content. The style elements, which is the second table that's shown on 491. The row style, which is the style for data rows. Alternating rows if you're using zebra striping. Selected row style for the active row. Edit row style if the row is being edited. Empty row style if the data source is empty. Item style for an individual field. Header style for the header row. Footer style for the footer row. And pager style for the pager row. The grid view is rendered as an HTML table. So you can also use Bootstrap classes instead of a lot of the ones that are shown here. And we talk about that in just a minute. So here's an example of a control that uses field and style elements. Here we've added a lot of the colors and stuff. Okay? If you have a grid view control that uses Bootstrap CSS classes for styling, again, we can come in there then and we can add things like table stripe. This looks like it's a condensed table, etc. Because ASP.NET renders a grid view control as an HTML table, you can use the Bootstrap CSS classes for tables to style grid view controls. You can also use the CSS classes with the style elements that are shown here. For the Bootstrap table classes to be applied properly, an HTML table must have head and body elements. Now, ASP.NET doesn't render these by default, so you must add code in the pre-render event to do that. And the code you have to add is right here. It's also shown on page 493 in the text. So here's an example where you're using Bootstrap classes, and here are the non-Bootstrap classes. So here you've got the table striped. Here you have to manually show how you want the striping to take place. Type of an idea. All right, here is a grid view with sorting enabled. So you can, if you look at this, you may or may not be able to tell not just where the cursor hand is, but the ID field, the name field, and the category field are all sortable fields. They all appear as hyperlinks, and if you put your mouse over them, you can see how the cursor changes. The unit price and on-hand field in this example are not sortable fields. If you click category, it sorts it in order based on the category. If you click it again, it does a reverse sort, so the FXs would be first. If you want to enable sorting, you have to go in there and set the allow sorting property to true. Then you can set sorting expressions. So here we've got product ID and we've got name. If you want to sort on two fields, which is what we have here, category and name. So if you highlight category, it does it first by category and next by name. That's why these are all in alphabetic order, all the costumes, and why these are all in alphabetic order by special effects. For sorting to work, the data source mode property of the data source must be set to data set mode. You can't have it, in other words, in data reader mode. The grid view doesn't actually do the sorting. It relies on the underlying data source to sort the data. That's why you have to set it to data set. You can also work with pagination. All right, so here's a data control that has paginating or paging enabled. When you do this, you can decide how many records you want to show on a page. You can also customize what appears down here. So to enable paging, you've got to set the allow paging attribute for the grid view to true. Then you can add a pager style element to define the appearance on the page. You can also add a pager settings element to customize the way the paging works. Now this is 1, 2, 3, but if you wanted to, I don't know if they show it here, I guess not. Yeah, here's another way you could do it. All right. Or you could have the double less than sign for first, the less than sign for previous, the double greater than sign for last, and the greater than sign for next. So there's a lot of ways that you can set this up if you're so inclined. Bootstrap also contains a component for pagination. It does not appear to work very well, though, with using the grid view. It's more involved, so the recommendation is you do it the way that's shown on 496 through 499. So the allow paging property, if it's set to true, allows paging. The page size is the number of rows you want to display on each page. The default is 10. The properties for the pager settings element, this is the chart that's shown on 499 in the book, are mode, which controls what buttons are displayed in the page area. First page text, which is the text to display on the first page button. By default, it gives you that double less than sign. First page image URL. Previous page, which by default is the single greater than sign. Previous page image URL. Next page text, which is by default the greater than sign. Next page image URL. Last page text, which by default is the double greater than sign. Last page image URL, page button count, which is the number of buttons that you get if it's set to numeric or numeric first last. Position, which is where you want it to display, which you can set to top, bottom, or top and bottom, which I find confusing. And visible, if you don't want pager controls, you can set that to false. So here's an example. Setting it like this. Again, next, prev for previous, first, and last. I don't believe the order in which you set these matters. But next, previous, first, last, so we've got next page text, previous page text, first page text, and last page text. You can set a page size property to specify the number of rows. We already talked about that. By default, each time a different page is displayed, all the rows in the data source are red. To avoid that, you can use allow custom paging and virtual item count. And the author says if you want to do that, see the online help. All right. Next, we've got this fairly simple product list application here, which is shown starting on page 500. And the author says here, the following topics present the design mode for an application that uses a grid view to list the rows of a data source. This application provides for sorting and paging. It uses a grid view control to display a list of products in the products table. The grid view control is bound to an SQL data source. Sorting is enabled for the first 3 columns, so you can sort by just ID, just by name, or a category with name also. Paging is enabled, 8 products show per page, and the currency formatting is applied to the unit price. Okay? So this is the product list, and I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe that's the one that I have up here. I believe I've got the more advanced product list, but I want to look to make sure. Yeah, this also allows us to add a new category. I don't want to show this one yet, so I'm going to come in here. That was the maintenance one. We want this one, the product list. I did find out that if I come in here, normally I have people do a file and then go to open website and then choose this. That's not working well. But if I come on here and I double click on the solution file, it appears to open up okay. All right. So far, so good. Let's put it that way. So this code in this product list, this code that you'll see right here is the same code that's shown in the book on 502, 503, okay, on those 2 pages, I guess. So it looks like this, and let's run it and take a look at it. All right, so we've got a single data source, and we dragged in our grid view control, and we set, notice that if I click here, there's an allow sorting, and you can see that it's set to true. For this, it's set to true for this, and it's set to true for this. All right? Now, just to show you, I'm going to run this. Then I'm going to go back and make a simple change to it. And I'm at 20 minutes, so after I make that change, I'm going to be almost finished here. So this is showing number one. Notice if I do it by, it's already by ID, but I can do it by name. Go back to ID. I can do it by category. Okay, and there's page 1, page 2, and page 3. All right, so you see all that. Good. All right, so why am I showing you that? You'll see why in just a moment. All right, I'm going to stop the run, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to highlight unit price, and I'm going to have the allow sorting. Why is that set? I didn't think that was set to true. Oh, this is on the whole grid. What I want to do is I want to allow sorting for the unit price also. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to look at my code file. So let's go into source here. Okay, and there's all my fields. Now this allow paging, I'm looking for the allow sorting. There's allow sorting is equal to true. So I'm going to grab this. And right now, I believe at least, on the unit price, we don't have allow sorting to true. Here's our unit price field. And you notice there is no allow sorting in there. So I'm going to add it. All right, so there's allow sorting equal true. Says it's not a valid attribute of this bound field. Huh. Paging on pre-render. Let's put it this way. There is a way that you can do that, that if I wanted to have every field in there be sortable, I could do it. All right? I don't want to take the time to figure that out now because it'll just take time. All right. So the ASPX file is shown here. The grid view control is formatted using Bootstrap CSS classes. All right? So that's, you see the col, XS, etc. That's what they're using there. There's a pager settings element that's used to specify the type of pager control to display. So somewhere in here is the type of pager. There's allow paging is true, but somewhere in here the pager is actually set up. The SQL data source, so somewhere in here also is our select expression. There it is. So we're telling it we want what? The product ID, the name, the category ID, the unit price, the on-hand from products. So there's no sorting that's being done here. It's saying show us everything. There's also an event handler that's in here that's done for the pre-render event that puts in our, this line right there. That line that you see right here. Let me move this over, see how much of this I can show in here. Most of it. We close there. This line sets up the header and the footer. You need that line in there in the pre-render event of the grid view. You need to put that in there because that establishes the T-head and the T-foot that the Bootstrap classes need in order to be able to do their job. All right? That was explained on page 493 in the book, if you do care. All right, and that's all fine, but what if I want to update the grid view data? So what if I want to update what's in my grid view? Well, that's explained starting on page 504, and I'll continue on with that in a couple.